Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you guys enjoy this podcast, you can show your support by either writing a review on iTunes or by becoming a patron via interviewthefuture.com. My guest today is Dr. Jad Tarifi. Jad is the CEO and co founder of Integral AI, focused on developing foundation world models for real world applications. Through Integral AI, he has embarked on a mission to give humankind a true magic wand. We'll be definitely talking about that. Before founding Integral AI, however, Jad spent nearly a decade at Google AI, where he led the creation of generative AI imagination models and spearheaded research on learning from limited data. Jad is also the author of the upcoming Freedom series books, which is a 4 volume guidebook that explores the future of AI, human potential, and the societal transformation in the age of AGI. So, welcome to Singularity FM, Jad.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So, Jad, if we meet each other on a conference or somewhere on Google's campus, which is a wonderful place, and I've never met you and I've never heard of you before, and we're kind of sharing lunch perhaps, and if I ask, who is Jad Tarifi? Can you tell me in your own words in one sentence? How would you do that?
Someone who's curious about the world. Simple.
A curious person about the world. Wonderful. So I know that you have a very diverse educational and other background. So I think you have been educated in Canada and the United States. You've lived and worked in the United States, and you probably have lived and worked for the last 5, maybe 10 years in Japan, where you currently are. So let me ask you, your degrees are kind of all over the place. You have mathematics, you have computer science, you have a master's degree in quantum computers, of all other things. What was your first love? Computer science, mathematics, physics, quantum computers?
As a child, I was really interested in science and art, and I couldn't decide between the two until my math teacher said, you can always do art as a hobby, and science, you can't do it as a hobby. You really have to get the math in straight. So I dived into physics growing up. My childhood was full of physics, Einstein, quantum mechanics. Modern physics is really powerful tool to open your mind that reality might not be what we experience day to day. So that led me to philosophy, and eventually, the discipline to do that in the university is just to put a kind of a title on it. But um, genuinely, it's the curiosity to understand how the world works. Um, that is how I define science, and ultimately, finding the nature of reality.
That's wonderful. And I really love that because all the rage for the last 10, 15, 20 years since my degree in philosophy, by the way, my undergraduate is in philosophy with focus on ancient Greco Roman philosophy. And the STEM kind of idea has permeated the culture, and the more powerful technology has become, the more the idea of STEM has come around. And for me, it's always been not about STEM, but about STEAM. Yes, science, technology, engineering, and math are super important, no doubt about it, but art is right in the heart of those, because science and technology help us to live a better life, a safer life, a more comfortable life. They help us how to live, but art gives us the purpose of why to live or what to live for. And so that I'm very surprised, pleasantly surprised that you put so much stress on art.
Thank you. And may I ask you a question? How do you define art for yourself?
Well, funny you would ask because I was going to ask you, how do
Okay.
you define artist? because I know that word has a big importance to you and your life, and I think we all, both me and my audience, we all can learn from your conception.
Okay. Um, for me, art is about genuine creativity, which I define to be something beyond imagination. So, imagination is exploring possibilities of what can be, but art is exploring those possibilities and actually making a choice that goes beyond the inertia, and that choice shapes reality.
Mhm.
So, being an artist is being a co author of reality. And then when we think of the best artists in the world, they really shape the reality we live in.
Yes, actually, one of my keynote speeches is uh, about the so-called context effect, and I'm not sure. I have to ask Chat GPT. Probably someone else came up with this too, but I came up with it. The context effect, where I argue that context is king, not content, because the framework matters more than the facts. The facts only have a meaning within a framework. And by the way, to answer your question, because I don't want to avoid it, I have two definitions that you might find helpful, perhaps, I hope. One is the more general one, and one is the more specific. The more general one comes from Seth Godin, who is one of my heroes. I love him so much. And he says, an artist takes it personally. An artist puts it on the line. An artist takes chances and risks. But the other definition, which is more specific and goes to more towards art in, I would say, really close to my heart, is something like this. Let me see if I can remember it and say it in the right way. Art is that which comforts those who are uncomfortable and makes those who are comfortable uncomfortable. That's my favorite definition of art.
Amazing. I really resonate with everything you said. So, with the context versus content, I think that's actually a very deep and true thing. And funny enough, that we actually, as we build models that understand the world, we realize that when you look at the world, you're not just seeing an object, you're seeing an entire context. And in the end, the last bit of that is just the label you assign to the object. So it seems to be true about the brain and about our experience of reality. In terms of Seth Godin, I think we have, the two of us, we have something in common with him. I would say the hairstyle.
I was going to say the same thing.
But
No interference.
yeah, I really resonate with his artist takes it personally. And to me, that's one of the reasons why I feel, um, the struggle of an artist is a really important thing, right? So it's no walk in the park to be an artist. It has to be something that you take in, that you explored all the emotional experience when you're actually producing art. And what I wrote when you said the third thing about art, as I wrote, art equal compassion and rebellion.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Very well. Very well said. Uh, well, so we share a mentor or someone that we really respect and like in the name of Seth Godin. Who was your greatest mentor or inspiration when you were growing up? You mentioned Albert Einstein before that. Was it him or was it some other figure? Maybe Richard Feynman, if you were such a big fan of physics.
Feynman is fantastic. There's so many people that I admire deeply, but growing up, a lot of my friends had like posters of like Britney Spears, or in my bedroom, I had three posters. One was Einstein, the other was Newton, and the third was Leibniz.
Hmm.
So
May I ask you? I know you were born in Lebanon
yes,
during the Civil War, I understand.
yes. during the Civil War,
So
the heart of
that
it.
must have been a horrible time. Do you have any memory of that, and pretty challenging childhood? I suspect or imagine. How long did you stay in Lebanon for? When did you leave to study abroad and so on?
Well, I grew up in Lebanon, so I left around 20. Um, I think growing up in Lebanon is a very intense, transformative experience. Um, being a country full of contradictions, extremely beautiful from the perspective of nature. People are very dynamic and active and warm. Has the Mediterranean vibe, but also deeply conflicted. So it's a great place to start your life if you're gonna develop the take it personally to change the world, that artistic desire to change the world. I think sometimes I wonder if I grew up in a very peaceful place like Finland, would I have wanted to change the world so deeply, and would I have taken it so personally? So
Yeah,
definitely, growing up in times of war is formative. Uh, but thankfully, I had a great family and a lot of support, so I was able to kind of um, rise from that and lead a life that I'm really happy with. I'm really proud of.
yeah. You were very fortunate because many people probably didn't have the same chance like you did in Lebanon, especially during the. But even today, again, it's going through horrible crisis after crisis after crisis. There constantly. It seems that the Lebanese people cannot get a break. Um, uh, yeah. So, how do you make the jump from physics in general to quantum computing? Because that's completely different sort of niche or realm. So, was there anything in particular that pushed you? Is there a story?
Mhm. Great question. Um, well, the first thing to step back is to understand where the world of physics is right now, right? Um, so physics, most people, when you talk to physicists, they say the challenge of physics is combining quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, with general relativity. I think that's kind of a bad formulation of the problem. The challenge of physics right now is getting a proper theory of quantum field theory, a proper theory of quantum mechanics. Um, Go ahead.
Michio Kaku told me that he is working on a single unified theory that would explain life, the universe, and even love itself. That's what he was trying to do with that was his kind of life's mission, if you will.
Fantastic. The thing with physics, though, is that the foundation of quantum mechanics is it's not something we fully understood. The scientific community still debates, or the interpretations of quantum mechanics, and looking at each one of those interpretations, some of them might seem attractive at first, but the deeper you look into them, the more naive they turn out to be. And so my goal was to try to understand quantum mechanics as deeply as possible. And I felt thinking in terms of quantum algorithms, the theory of what quantum computing or what quantum world can actually do can help me develop the intuition, the deep sense of quantum mechanics. So it's a way to understand quantum mechanics. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is I was fortunate to be in Waterloo, which at the time and maybe still now is the number one place in the world for quantum computing, and I could interact with many brilliant people.
What's the
um,
name of the quantum institute there? I forgot. I've been there twice.
Probably IQC, and there's a Parameter
The
Institute.
Parameter Institute, yes.
Great place.
Yes, wonderful place. I've enjoyed visiting the campus twice. By the way, speaking of physics in general, I had Lawrence Krauss, and he didn't mince any words with respect to string field theory in general and Michio Kaku in particular. He said that's not even physics. In his opinion, in the opinion of Lawrence Krauss, that that wasn't even science because you couldn't even test it, and it was so way out there, out of the realm of science, that it was, he even called it philosophy. And the way he used the term was not a compliment. Just like when I was called Socrates in the army, it was no compliment towards me.
I understand his perspective, but if you allow me to defend it, I,
Please.
I, I might. I'm not. I don't believe string theory is the right place to get a unified model of reality. I think the best place to start is by understanding quantum physics more deeply. However, um, I think string theory gets a little bit of a too much of a bad rap recently. And if I was to take the contrarian perspective and try to defend it, I would say um, trying to understand already the physics that we have, even if there's no testable predictions that come out of it. And by the way, there's turned out to be not so true. There are some testable predictions, but even if there was no testable predictions, help us reformulate what we already have. And from that new reformulation, we can derive insights that might lead to the next jump. So this happened before in the history of physics. One time it happened is when um, we moved from formulating classical mechanics as Newtonian equation to the Lagrangian formulation, the Hamiltonians, and that formulation was easier to generalize to quantum physics. So sometimes reinterpreting what we already have, reframing it, which is related to the context versus content thing we were discussing earlier,
Yes.
does indeed help. So I do want to see people try to reformulate what they already have, even and when I want to give them some grace so that they don't have to immediately have testable predictions. There's maybe some value in reformulations first before we take that giant leap.
This, by the way, reminds me, and the previous thing that you said about your support of my idea about context, and the context, what I call the context effect. Marcus Aurelius once said that the color of your thoughts is the color of your world. And basically that's your context. All of us have these sunglasses, if you will, tinted sunglasses in front of our eyes. They're inevitable, I think. The only thing we can do is become aware of them, so at least we can take them into account. But we cannot remove them because, due to our embodiedness in nature, we would always have a certain bias and perspective that is skewed and, and partial and not full, in my opinion. But it is still better to be aware of it than not to be aware of it. And then maybe we can even start working on having a choice to choose deliberately what kind of framework we may want to embrace as one, or context as one that serves us best. And that's a sense of freedom and power, the freedom to choose and the power to embrace what you have chosen, I think. But Jad, let me ask you this. What's your biggest dream? You said already you want to change the world. What's your biggest dream? Is that it? And how?
Well, if the dream is just changing the world, I feel that's a bit dangerous, right? Because are you changing it in a good way, or um, I would define my greatest dream right now is to help humanity achieve greater and greater freedom.
Yes, and you talk about that in your book, which we will talk about towards the second half of our conversation. So, your biggest dream is to help humanity achieve the greatest freedom. So, what, in your view, are the biggest issues or dangers that humanity is facing today?
You know,
There's a
um,
group of scientists who have the kind of the nuclear dooms clock, uh, and they set it up sometimes once a year, sometimes once every couple of years, sometimes more often, depending. And right now, if I am not mistaken, we are somewhere in the 20th second or 30 second, 20 seconds before midnight. It has never been higher or closer to midnight before, not even during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And by the way, when they had that At that time, that only stayed for a couple of weeks. Now it has been at that level for several years, at least two, I think, since the latest time that they changed the clock closer to midnight was, I think, during the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And after that, of course, we have the whole Israel Gaza campaign. We have, the collapse of the Assad regime yesterday, or the last few days, not yesterday, but the last few days. We have one crisis unfolding in our world after another. So, what, in your view, are, let's say, the top 3 to 5 most critical, crucial crises that humanity must pay attention to?
So there's, obviously the nuclear crisis. My father was a nuclear physicist, so I grew up with that. Climate is definitely an issue. Um, but nuclear and climate, I would say I would want to abstract it one level higher. I would call them collective action crises. So, how do we create alignment between increasingly powerful stakeholders, right? So, crisis of collective action. And there are crises, I would say, in the nature itself, right? So, Mother Nature, right? If we get comet to come to the Earth, there are solar flares, there are all sorts of risks that are nothing to do with human choice. Um, they're more about, a new type of virus might come up, death itself, entropy, I would say. So I would say two things I care about. One is collective action. Like, how do we create alignment between increasingly powerful actors? Uh,
Mhm.
one and two, how do we react, embrace, and transform the threats coming from nature
Mhm.
itself?
Mhm. Very well. So interesting, though. So, first, I gotta say, you're probably the first scientist who is expert in AI or quantum mechanics so far on my podcast who has noticed nuclear weapons in their top choice. Uh, and I applaud you for that, because I think that's definitely in the top three, probably number one in my books, at least. Uh, and the other interesting thing is, actually, two other interesting thing is, like, the things which fall outside of our control, like you called it Mother Nature, or the universe, entropy, etc. Uh, do you think those are in the top three or top five? Because in my books, yes, we can get hit by a meteorite just like the one that hit the Earth 65 million years ago and caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. But I don't see that as the kind of pressing not even top five danger right now.
What I did was didn't classify or rank. I didn't rank. What I did is classify them to two broad categories. One
Yes.
category is collective action problems. And the reason I'm choosing this is because there might be a single solution for all of them: climate crisis, nuclear crisis, um, you know, runaway competition within markets, monopolies, all of that stuff. So there are collective action problems. The nature of these collective action problems is about poor information exchange and not having clarity about what's a collective goal that we should have. That we can discuss why, but it really comes down to crisis in communication. There's a beautiful theorem called Ullmann's agreement theorem, which means, if I will dumb it down, if two if two people had infinite communication, if we sat down and had this podcast for years and years on end, we'll eventually come to agree on everything and accept each other completely, right? So there's a crisis of collective action, which is related to communication, creating shared vision. And there's a crisis, and then there's Mother Nature. So that different category, I don't think it's something we can't do anything about. In fact, there's a lot we can do about. And the whole point is, let's not lose sight and focus too much on collective. We have to focus on self collective action. But if we're only playing games with each other, we might have the same fate as the dinosaurs, right? So we we need to have also resources to um, to not go extinct. One of the things that really, as a child, terrified me was to realize that the galaxy is full of rogue planets. There are planets, you know, massive speeds. We by the time we detect them, they'll probably be crushing the Earth. So there's massive existential risk out there, and we need to have some resources focused on that. And interestingly, these two categories might support each other. It might be, at the end of the day, we can agree we want to overcome these massive risks as a way to maybe bridge the gap we have between each other, because otherwise we would feel like, oh, there's no reason to find an agreement.
Yeah, I think that an external threat to our planet might actually be useful to the degree that it brings humanity to the realization that we're all in the same boat. And I think astronauts called this the overview effect. When you go in space and look at the pale blue dot called Earth, you know, I think the quote was like, one astronaut was saying, "You want to go down to the politicians and shake them and say, look at this son of a bitch. Like, look at how amazing our Earth is, and it's only one, and we're all in it together." And so I can agree with that. I agree even more so on the other end, though, that we do need a unifying effect or cause. Actually, I've been working on my second book for the last 7 or 8 years, on and off, and my original title was called "Rewriting the Human Story: How Our Story Determines Our Future," and now the later version is "The Context Effect: How Our Story Determines Our Future." And my argument in it basically is that the human story is falling apart. It has brought us to the 21st century. It has taken us to Mars and beyond, but the story that has brought us to here is now no longer useful. It doesn't serve us anymore. It is basically dead weight. And we need a new story. And our story gets periodically rewritten. The last time we rewrote the human story was during the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. And it is time for us to rewrite it again. And hopefully, if we do it the right way, then we can unify all of humanity together, not just like one nation or one race, but all of humanity together. And for that purpose, part of that story could be always an external threat, like a comet or a meteorite or something speeding towards Earth. Uh, However, on the other point about what is under our control, I agree with you, but I have a little bit of a different interpretation, namely that humanity's greatest challenge is only really one and the same thing. So it's not climate change, it's not nuclear weapons, it's not soil erosion, it's not ocean acidification, it's not plastic pollution, it's not organized crime, it's not mass migration, it's not war. It is basically all of those are the embodiment of one and the same thing playing itself over and over again, which is our own power far outpacing our own wisdom to apply it in a smart and non self destructive manner. So, in other words, I disagree with the people who say that the biggest problem we're facing is the control or the AI alignment problem. I say that the AI and control problem is a reflection of the human lack of control and alignment problem. In other words, the greatest challenge is not for us to control AI, but to control our own selves. And how we fail or succeed to do that, self control, self discipline, self respect, resolving the conflicts among and between us, will determine whether we fail or succeed as a species and as a civilization, in my view.
Yeah, there's a lot I resonate with. I was trying to find things I disagree. But I definitely, I mean, in the book, it seems like we will talk about the book later, but I definitely focus on that. Human alignment is the key. Um, it's at least one of the keys for AGI alignment. Definitely, I agree on that.
You're a
Um,
first key, in fact, in the book.
and one of the things I just want to make two comments.
Yeah,
Just to be a little bit controversial, because if I just say I agree, maybe it's boring, right? So
please.
let's find controversies. Let's get into trouble. Um, so there is a constant existential threat from the outside, and that's just entropy. So things we're gonna die by default,
Yes.
right? And we just maybe forget about that because we're a bit too arrogant. Um, but death is coming in the form of entropy, and that could be a way to unite us. That is the constant existential threat. Second, power and wisdom. While I agree with you, I feel like I can easily take the opposite view and say, well, if you give me enough power that I can heal people's sickness, I can heal people's emotional troubles. If you give me power that I can create a fountain of youth, of infinite food, uh, maybe that will also go a long way to inspire more wisdom in others, right? So there is a cycle between the two. Yes, our lack of wisdom is a problem, but then sometimes we're not really powerful enough. So that creates this weakness, I think, um, puts us in a situation where we want to take shortcuts. And this also reinforces poor wisdom. So I don't see them as like an either or, but more as a co-emergent or a cyclical pattern.
Yeah, by the way, death has that power to focus, to provide focus and clarity. And that's a fact observed both in the ancient East and the West. So the Stoic philosophers and the Socratics were big on, in fact, Socrates said that philosophy is all about learning and dealing with death. And of course, in Eastern philosophy, Zen Buddhism and the samurai, you live in Japan, uh, Bushido or Budo is all about that. It's about daily contemplation of death, and that brings clarity and focus and appreciation for every day and everything that we do or we don't get to do. So I think it actually bringing more awareness to death might bring some clarity. And one way to do that could be actually with the nuclear dooms clock, like the scientists are doing, showing people in a kind of a way that we are very close to the precipice. In fact, if we're not careful, we can just easily go over.
This brings it, by the way, I want to make a point. So Memento Mori, right?
Yes,
Stoicism,
yes,
of course, Bushido. But this brings the conversation kind of in a circle because you asked me in the beginning of the conversation about growing up in Lebanon, how that's like. And
yes.
I actually had to discover the same wisdom as a child by experiencing death and being in many situations where I, stared death in the face. It got me to kind of meditate on that, and I realized that that is an extremely strong driver to overcome fear, but also feel urgency of action. So I've been blessed to have a childhood that graved into my psyche or my personality, the Memento Mori or the Code of Bushido, which is one of the things I deeply resonated with when I first arrived in Japan.
Yeah, and to answer your previous question, would you be wanting to change the world if you didn't have that kind of experience? My bet is no. And even if you did, you wouldn't have the commitment. You wouldn't have the desire to put yourself, the artistic desire to put yourself on the line, to take it personally as a responsibility. You wouldn't have any of that if you didn't see death up close when you were growing up? And by the way, as a side note, interesting side note, that's when you started meditation, didn't you?
Yes.
Tell me
Yes.
about that.
So my first experience with meditation is that sense of memento mori, focusing on death. And I was fascinated with how much it shifted my mindset from a state of, I would say, fear to a state of confidence and play and ease of movement. But that was just the beginning. And then growing up, I deepened into that and got into, exploring the different traditions, whether it's Western traditions from Stoicism to, mystical traditions like Kabbalah, Sufism, and all the way to Eastern, which, I spent decades deepening into, from branches of Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana, Vajrayana, um, and of course Zen. So that's been a lifelong journey for me, and definitely transformative. I always recommend it. Even in our company, we have um, a benefit. We have several benefits. One of the benefits is around meditation. So
Wow, that's wonderful. But tell me, was there a specific incident that you can tell us a story about that triggered that meditation practice in you?
yes, so I was about 5 to 6 years old, um, and it was at night, and my parents were out for some event, and they didn't come back for many many hours. And then there was a lot of you know rockets, bombs, explosions everywhere, and the building was shaking. And
Wow.
I thought they're dead, so that's like already a big disaster. And I was very worried, um, and so I had to kind of contemplate death at that moment. And a civil war is different than a war in the sense that civil war is happening literally outside your house,
Yeah.
and you can see everything. It's like fireworks.
Yeah.
So um, that led me to contemplating uh, death, and there was there was a long time of contemplation, and then a sudden shift. Well, so what if it's going to happen? I embraced it. And then there was a shift, and I was just enjoying my time playing, and then my parents thankfully came soon after. So that is the first experience that I can remember about meditation.
Wow. And you're 5 years old. That's amazing. So early in life. Let's see how that could. So that's kind of like the first third of our conversation here, which kind of lays down the background of who you are and where you're coming from and what your dreams are and what your fears are, which is going to provide context for us to actually jump in and talk about the meat of the matter here, which is AI, of course. But before we get to the A, let's talk about the I. So, what's intelligence?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Um, I think intelligence and life are almost synonymous. So there's a story about entropy. There's a story about how the universe can go and shape itself in various forms. And at some point, you want to create something that lasts. And for something to last, it has to manage its environment and its own structural coherence. So it has to manage entropy. And to manage entropy is impossible because you can't even you can't even compute it. You can't do anything. So the best you can do is create a model of the world and yourself, and then minimize the difference between your model and the world. And you can do that in two ways.
Isn't that
One,
what's actually happening in our brains? I mean, our brains create the model of the world, and then we're just looking at the difference between what the feedback we get and what the brain model predicts, and only we only therefore see the difference, whatever is like out of the pattern.
Right. So that's why it's intelligent. We hopefully we're intelligent. Um, so intelligence is about creating a model of the world and then minimizing the difference between that model and the world itself. And there's two ways you can do that. The most people first, oh, I'll improve my perception or improve the model. But there's another way is to actually change the world to be more like your model. So that you can also derive action from that. So both perception and action naturally emerge from this definition of intelligence. That it's not my definition. It goes all the way back to what is life. The von Neumann, the physicist of the early 20th century, and most recently taken to the next level by Carl Friston. So he's one of the uh, proponents of what called the free energy principle. He he's been a great inspiration for me. I've been talking to him since grad school, and most recently we caught up and we talked about the book. And um, great guy.
Very interesting. So, intelligence is that which allows us to adapt ourselves to the world or adapt the world to ourselves. The second part of which is highly unreasonable. The first part is like what happens out there most of the time. The second part is like, I would say, where you're being totally unreasonable. And that reminds me to, I think it was George Bernard Shaw, wasn't it, who in Maxims for Revolutionists said that the reasonable man adapts themselves to the world. The unreasonable man refuses to adapt to the world and makes sure to adapt the world to themselves. And therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man.
Fantastic. And that is related to the artist as well, right?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Artists are definitely very unreasonable.
Yes.
So, okay, so that's intelligence. Then let's take it one step up. Where does the artificial part come in and how does it change the definition? Because, and I'll make it a little bit easier and a little bit harder for you. I've interviewed, I've done 300 episodes. I've interviewed many, many, many of the best quote or best known computer scientists. So far, no two AI or computer scientist experts ever have given me the same definition about AI. And that even irked Dr. Stuart Russell a little bit because when I asked him, he said, well, the definition is, of course, it's there. It's in the book, the classic book that him and Peter Norvig wrote. And, it has the definition of AI, which is a good definition, but no one else ever gave me that definition. So I want to find out what is your definition for AI?
So, by the way, I don't like the word artificial, um, unless you take it as art. The art in artificial, maybe that's the part I like, right? But when
Hmm.
we usually feel the word artificial, we tend to associate it with something like fake.
Yes.
I don't think there's anything fake about AI. Um, so I would say AI is the art of building systems, machines that are intelligent. Very simple. Now, maybe a more interesting definition to discuss would be what is AGI. That's
That's the
slightly
next one. That's the
more
next one because we're building it. The I, the AI, and the next one is the AGI.
big part. So the reason I think this is interesting is because there's a lot of discussions now on AGI, and some people claim we've achieved it. Some people claim we're never going to achieve it, um, and it's hard to think about those claims without having a clear definition, right? And so the
So
standard definition you hear about is it's a system that is roughly capable at the human level across a broad range of tasks. Another definition that's popular is a model that can do most economically valuable tasks. I think those are good definitions, but they become super vague because the tasks change one before the model and then after the model, right? So the tasks we do now will change if I introduce, I don't know, GPT 5 or 6. So that definition kind of is self contradictory.
AI is
Is that
that which we currently cannot achieve with
exactly?
technology.
That's the definition. So we need a better definition. And the definition that I came to really like recently is AGI is the capability to learn any skill under two conditions. Okay, the first condition is to do so safely, so without unintended consequences. Example would be learning to cook, but you don't get to burn the kitchen in the process. The second condition is with energy efficiency. So you want the total energy efficiency of learning that skill to be at or below a human learning that skill. And those two criteria are very important because they rule out a lot of approaches to AI. They don't allow us to cheat. You can always learn a skill by cheating, by putting a lot of energy, a lot of humans to do demonstrations to teach the AI.
Labeling,
But
context.
that, yeah, that doesn't really, that's not the AGI we want. The AGI we want has these two characteristics: capability of learning skills and doing so um, reliably, safely, and efficiently from an energy perspective. And the thing I like about this definition is that it's the criteria for emancipation. If we have that, then we reach a threshold where we can start saying we can emancipate people from doing, I would say, the current economic labor paradigm. To emancipate people from the current, I would say, wage slavery paradigm, that definition of AGI would work. The other definition we talked about, because of the inconsistency, would not give us that effect because you can always have new jobs of people, you know, having producing training data for the AI. We don't want that job. We don't want the job for humans to be like farming data for AI. We want the AI to learn efficiently on its own new skills.
Very cool. So we'll talk about the impact on jobs perhaps later on when we get to speak about technological unemployment. But to stay on this definition for a second, it would seem that, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, under your definition, we haven't achieved AGI, have we? Because the current models are very inefficient. I mean, for God's sakes, companies are buying now nuclear power plants to be able to to provide enough power for their training models, and they're looking ahead, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And actually, one of the greatest fear is that you see the United States might have the edge a little bit on the training and the experts and this, that, and the other thing, but China, for example, has the edge on power because in the last I don't know, I was reading 20 or 25 years, China has released 37 nuclear power plants and the United States has had two. So it would seem that we're not there yet with respect to AGI under your definition. And that solves that debate in my book. Is that, do you agree with that?
I agree with the statement that current transformer models in the, let's say, GPT class, even with the addition of reasoning models like O1, uh, do not satisfy the criteria for AGI. However, stay tuned for an announcement very soon from our company.
Wow. Okay. Well, we definitely have to talk about that a little bit later, even if you can't go into details, but definitely. Okay. Well, now we're starting to get very interesting and very serious. Okay. So we talked about AI, AGI. Next one up is ASI,
Great. That is very interesting because I also have a kind of different opinion on that.
artificial superintelligence.
Exactly. Thank you for that question. It feels like I gave you the questions because you're asking me questions I'm really enjoying. Um, but I'm liking how the spontaneous conversation is getting us there. So, superintelligence has many definitions. So you can have a definition that's smarter than any smarter than the smartest human, or smarter than all of humanity combined. I don't like these definitions. I think there's a much cleaner definition, which is an asymptotic definition, and that's why it's very useful. So the asymptotic definition of superintelligence is superintelligence plus all of humanity should be not greater than superintelligence alone. That is an asymptotic definition. So I'll give you an example of that. So to ground it in a practical example, if the whole world was a chessboard, we already have superintelligence, because AI right now is so good at chess that AI plus human is cannot beat AI alone,
Yes.
right? So there was a time after the Kasparov game.
Yeah, we had the Centaur period, which lasted, I think, less than 18 months.
Exactly. So that there was a time, yes, where human plus uh, AI could beat AI, but when human plus AI cannot beat AI, that is the definition of superintelligence. Interestingly, that is asymptotic, because there's always things that only you can do, even if I have a superintelligent entity, which is primarily simulate yourself, right? So no matter how advanced superintelligence or AI is, it's not going to be able to simulate an entire human, right? So that definition is basically something that we can never achieve, but we can move towards. And I like that because it gives me this sense that superintelligence is kind of a asymptotic state. We move towards it. Um, when we have AGI, we can only get better and better and better. So becoming.
But the world is not a chessboard because chess is a closed system. And we know that closed systems, even complicated ones like Go, can be and have been solved decades ago by AI, demonstratively, to the point where the centaur of human and AI has no chance against single or simple. It's definitely not simple, but single single AI. But that's true for closed systems. I don't think it's true for open systems, at least yet, is it?
Absolutely correct. I agree with you 100%. And that's why it's an asymptotic definition. It's not something we can reach. Um, and that's very important because it gives you a sense of meaning for humans, for forever, basically. Um, Actually, stepping back, I think to connect back to physics, one of my problems of physics is that we tend to think of the universe as a closed system in our models, where it's in fact a very open system. And one of the things I'm working on is basically how to rewrite physics as in a completely open way, right? Um, it's
Wow.
it's something I'm very interested in, and so I totally agree with you. And it connects deeply to philosophers like Hegel and what's the nature of the future, freedom, all of that stuff. So happy to do again at some point when you're interested in that.
Wow. I mean, we've already spoken for an hour. I got a feeling we can literally talk for 2 weeks, like nonstop. There is so much overlap, and I'm learning so much, and it's so wonderful. I'm enjoying this so much too that I think we can literally speak forever. So, but the next definition after ASI is, of course, the singularity. What is the singularity for you?
So I've seen two def- two definitions of it that seem interesting. So of course the metaphor comes from black hole physics, um, and so the one definition is it's the point where we can no longer make useful predictions about the future because things are moving so fast. Um, I like that definition, and in that sense, singularity there's not a hard threshold because I feel like already we can't do predict 5, 10 years from now, this seems like a very long time. uh, the past was relatively more boring, I would say. It's getting more and more exciting. So I like that soft definition. There's a there's another definition which I feel like is more cold, which I don't like. It's related to basically when the world is moving so fast that there's no point in human intelligence anymore. And I think that's not a definition that I subscribe to personally.
That's so the first. So I have an article on my blog that I wrote like 10 years ago or so, give or take, called 14, 15, 17 definition of the technological singularity, trying to stress how random number of definitions we can have. But the first one that you mentioned is of the school that is so called the Event Horizon School, which is one of the major schools. And the second definition reminds me to, I think it was Kevin Kelly who said that the technological singularity is the idea that the change in the next 5 minutes would supersede the change in the previous million or something like that. Uh, so that's the accelerating change hypothesis, that change gets to be accelerating so fast and fast that we cannot keep up anymore. And there's at least 6 or 7, 8, 10 other definition schools there. But one thing that, going beyond the definition, and you already kind of started addressing that issue, is the debate about the soft versus hard takeoff with respect to the singularity. So you already mentioned that perhaps we have already entered the period of the singularity, if defined as an event horizon, because we are already struggling to predict what will happen 5 or 10 years from now. And therefore, because it's kind of slowly advancing, relatively speaking, all of it, it's a more of a soft takeoff rather than a hard takeoff. Am I putting words in your mouth, or do I get what you're saying correctly here?
I like what you're saying. I want to add one more definition on your list of definitions for
Please.
singularity, my own definition. Right. I don't like to refer it this way because that word means different things for different people. But if I was to define singularity, I would define it as a state of infinite freedom, infinite agency for the universe itself. And that's a point at infinity. Again, it's an asymptotic definition. And from that perspective, I think our goal should be to move to that point of freedom.
If I
That's
were to be Alan Watts, I would say the universe always had infinite freedom over itself. Or the Hindu gods of creation, recreation, destruction, and the whole circus starting again, kind of, in a way, they've always had. It's like, I think Alan Watts called it playing hide and seek. The universe plays hide and seek with itself by creating humans. And because we are so enmeshed into our act, into our roles as being humans, that we've forgotten our true nature, because we're so into the hiding game and the seeking game, that we have forgotten our original nature. And that's what makes the game interesting for the universe. But actually, it's a way of expressing freedom and uh, exploring itself, according to
I
him.
definitely, yeah. Well, the idea doesn't go back to him. It's a tradition, like a
Sure,
very old Hindu idea,
sure, sure.
divine play,
Yes,
right? So we temporarily, bind ourselves. That's the notion of ego. Create a separation from reality in order to enjoy the process. Because otherwise, if you know everything, what's the point in playing the game, right?
yes.
That's a very I love that. Uh, the Those are not contradictory ideas, though. Just defining a point at infinity is super helpful because it can define a direction. So if you are someone who is already a point at infinity and closed your eyes, what do you want to seek? You're seeking the point of infinity again. So it gives you the what are you seeking component, or kind of a definition of a shared goal. So
You
I
want
agree.
to. My interpretation is that you want to forget that you've reached the point of infinity and kind of rediscover it again. which kind of relaunches the circle, the whole circle, if you will.
Yes, but I don't want to think of it as a circle because it seems like nothing happened if I do this process. But I think every time
Cycle
you,
maybe is better word.
I'm sorry, cycle,
Cycle, cycle might be a better word than circle.
yeah, it's a spiral cycle. So there is this cycle aspect to it, but there's a growth aspect to it because in that game, in that divine play, as they would say, a reality gets to define itself and gets to evolve and gets to change, and that's related to the unboundedness of the universe that we were talking about earlier.
But I think Marcel Proust was saying that the true discovery is not reaching new places, but having new eyes or looking at the same things in a new way, which is, by the way, cycling us back to the context, the importance of context. But Proust says that, all of discovery is basically traveling a long way to get back where you started, only to be able to see it with new eyes. And that's the nature of discovery, not seeing new horizons, but having new eyes to look with.
I totally agree, but and let me define that more concretely. Basically, it's updating your world model. So the meaning of eyes from an AI perspective, AGI perspective, is just a world model. So you're updating the world model. You're still seeing the same thing, but you're ascribing a much richer context to it, right?
Mhm.
So we're in complete agreement.
We waxed very poetic on that one, and we were already pretty poetic before that. But to answer the question, soft or hard takeoff, in your opinion?
I think it's going to be a soft but increasingly accelerating takeoff. Yeah,
And what's
it,
the timeline?
I think it's already set in motion.
With the announcement that your company is about to make?
That would be very self-absorbed, but if we take a longer view, maybe it started with the transistor, or maybe we started when we, you know, domesticated agriculture. Um, so it's been a long time coming. I'm not taking a deterministic view of this either, because it could, like I said, the future is completely open ended. So a rogue planet can come and destroy us tomorrow. So it's not guaranteed, but there is. It's been a long time coming. There's a tendency for sure, and we think the new announcement we're about to make is going to be an important milestone. But that's just the beginning. The rest is about scaling it and actually putting it to use in society and having all the discussions that we need to have about meaning and purpose, the economy, transforming our lives from mostly passive to more active, creative, increasing our agency, all that stuff. So it's not, when I was little, when I started on this path, I almost felt like getting to AGI is the finish point. Now I see it as just a starting point for something so exciting.
Every end is a new beginning, right?
Yep.
So we just go shift the curve to a new paradigm, and then we start at the bottom of the new one. Uh, but speaking of that, so today is December 11th, 2024. Usually it takes me, 2 or 3 days to edit these conversations to post them online for my audience. When do you plan to make your announcement?
We have this experiment going, and I don't want to announce something that I'm not fully confident that I can back. Um, and so it depends on how that experiment goes. It could, I can't give you a guarantee because if it doesn't work, but it could be by the end of the year or early next year. So within the next few weeks is where,
Because we're literally 19 days before the end of the year, or 20 at the most.
Yeah. So from in my the thing is, all the ingredients are there, and we're putting them together, and we want to see if when we put them together, we get what we expect. And we can't guarantee it because there could be unknown unknowns, as you know.
Hmm. So I take it you're telling me that you're like beta testing your, for lack of better words, AGI. And if you're satisfied with what you see in that testing, you would release a PR statement and maybe access API or whatever to the public. And if you're not, then you won't. Uh, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you in a way. In other ways, I'm worried for you and for us all. And in third ways, I've had people tell me the same thing on my podcast 10 years ago. I had someone who was working on AGI and is still working to this day today. And they told me they're very close. And I had them twice on my podcast. I think the last time was in 2014, if I remember off the top of my head. So that would be 10 years ago. And they're still not there.
Well, you probably know Jeff Hinton, right?
I'm
He's
definitely not Jeff Hinton. Definitely not.
so I really love Jeff Hinton. I've had fantastic conversations with him. He's really fun and light-hearted person. So one of the ways he tries to make fun of himself is say, "I've already found AGI 5 to 10 times." Because every few years he would come, "I've solved it. I found the key." And then there's a cycle, and which is why I'm not making any announcement yet, even though in my mind we have a lot of the ingredients already.
Very cool. Okay, well, what can you tell us about, I don't know, maybe the ingredients? What would be
Yes.
the ingredients for AGI?
Yeah, that is something interesting because I'm not committing it's there, but I can tell you the ingredients, right?
Please, thank you.
Yeah. So there is, I would say, two fundamental steps to developing AGI. The first fundamental step is having a base model. And currently, the base model are these kind of pre trained transformers. They operate like a black box. And that's the source of their inefficiency. Um, and they're so inefficient because the model has to discover all the patterns through gradient descent, which is great, but it's brute force. If you look at the neocortex, the neocortex is a sheet of paper, probably this size, and kind of wrapped up in your skull, and that's why it looks so wrinkly. But if you look at the structure of the neocortex, it can be divided into millions of these repetitive circuits. We call them columns or microcolumns. And it turns out they're doing roughly the same thing. Um,
There's a lot of redundancy.
there's a lot of redundancy. And then if you say take in one modality like vision and plug it into another modality, say taste or
Yes,
sound,
yes,
you learn to see through your tongue.
yes,
And this experiment has been done.
yes.
So when I started on AI maybe 20 years ago, I set as a goal to understand how that neocortical column, what's the algorithm running that neocortical column. So now, 20 years later, we basically have approached this. So it's a new class of pre-trained models, new architecture that not only makes predictions but also generates abstractions. And that is the key difference. Abstractions, as you know, are a compression of the data that you have. They basically lose some of the details but retain the essential elements. Um,
It's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like one of the key criticisms for the current models is that, let's say, if a child is born, they can see two cats, and for the rest of their lives, or two dogs, they know what a cat is and what a dog is, even if the cat is different size, color, shape, etc. Computers need 2 billion cats to figure out roughly what a cat is. And then every once in a while, they still come up with something that doesn't even look like a cat, even though they've had 2 billion cats to learn from. Is that correct to say? And so the abstraction would be what the child does from very few examples, which makes it, going back to your previous definition, very efficient, right? Because it doesn't need 2 billion examples, doesn't need the energy for 2 billion examples to train its model. And it abstracts the essence of a cat, if you will, in the Platonic sense, maybe even, and then is able to apply it to other cases to compare with them and say, okay, this is a cat also. This is also a cat or a dog. But computers are still struggling with that without that huge database, which makes them inefficient. And so what you're saying is your model, one of their uniqueness or unique selling propositions is you've solved that problem.
Yes, the abstraction is a key problem. I want to refine what you said a little bit.
Please,
It's
I'm
most
no expert. I'm just like,
it is mostly correct, uh, but I would say even regular transformer models, when they're doing the brute force, they will find abstractions. But these abstractions are hidden in the network. There's no, like, it's hard to pin them down. I mean, you can do some mechanistic interpretability stuff to try to find them, and they're implicit. And because they're implicit, they could be very lossy. They could be they're not well structured. You don't really there's a entire gray spectrum between you actually have the abstraction of the cat versus you don't have the abstraction, but you have a whole bunch of examples. It's not clean, right? So in some cases, large language models do create internal abstraction. In some cases, they don't. They just memorize.
mhm.
There's nothing forcing them to have these abstractions in a clean way, and that's what we figured out in our models.
So
So
that's one major ingredient. Is there
yes,
any others?
yes, several others. So still in this first category of a new type of models, right? So you need the ability to create abstractions, and you need the ability to learn continuously over time. So models that don't forget when you go from one domain to the next. This is a process of continual learning. Right now, when you look at models, they train for a very long time, and then you take them to a new domain, you fine tune them, and they forget. It's a very wasteful process. Our models can continuously grow over time, and they can grow in many ways. You can add new data, and they will learn it without forgetting the past. You can also add parameters to them. You can add layers. You can add modalities. So these, so we're moving from hard architectures to models that grow, that you can grow over time, which is an important ingredient for open-ended intelligence.
And that's kind of the nature of learning, growth, right?
Yes, growth, very important, and the nature of time. But we'll discuss that another time, maybe. Okay, so the new class of models. The second phase is to move from models that are more or less passive to active agents or operators. So this involves using these models to plan efficiently, right? And then use tools like APIs, like robots, to take physical action in the world, and then go back in circle, update the model. So this process of what we call active learning, it's like the scientific method. You create a model of the world, you plan with that model, you know what you don't know, you take action, and then you update your model again.
Yeah, you
So
experiment, then you analyze the results of the experiment, and then you repeat based
and
on
you
the.
learn skills, and you learn skills that way,
Yeah.
and you grow a body of knowledge and competencies, capabilities in the world. And that is basically AGI. um, Now, a word on planning. There's a lot of people working on planning right now. There's, of course, the O1 model
Yes.
from OpenAI, but that is very inefficient form of planning, because that planning is very exhaustive. So if you look at the energy cost of planning as a function of depth of the problem, it's exponential. That's
Yes.
why the OpenAI models are so expensive. What we figured out is a much more efficient form of this planning. that is using the abstractions that we talked about. So
Wow.
when you're planning a trip to another country, you don't plan every single action that you're going to take. You go very high level. Roughly, you want to buy a ticket and go to the plane. The first step is buy a ticket. Then you say, okay, to buy a ticket, I'm going to open my computer, right? And Google for the ticket, search for the ticket. The first step is open my computer. To do that, I'm going to move my muscle, right? And then you plan out very, very detailed, right? So it's kind of hopeless to plan at the lowest level. You want to go up the hierarchy so you can plan efficiently and then go down when necessary. So this efficient form of planning is something that we already have. And the ability to use tools is something we've been doing for a long time because we've been focused on robotics, and robotics is just a tool for AI. It's a form of it's a way to take action in the physical world. But you can also have digital tools like programs, like APIs, digital services, and so on. So putting it all of these ingredients together and seeing the AI model learn new skills is the final step. It's just combining the ability to create abstractions, plan, take action, and do continuous learning, and doing that in a loop in kind of an open environment.
Well,
To me, is AGI.
the final step would be verifying that the learning process has occurred indeed in a useful manner that's verifiable and repeatable over time. And I guess that's what you're testing right now.
Yeah.
Uh, Based on what you told me, if I had money to invest, I'd be thinking now, how do I invest in this guy's company? And I haven't said that before on my podcast, but wow, that's really uh, kind of mind-boggling me now. Uh, Tell me, is the name of your product? Okay, so let's talk about your company then, because we're talking about AGI and the fact that you're working on it, the fact that you're getting ready to make an announcement, apparently. So tell me about your company, Integral AI.
Yeah. So our goal is to give humankind a true magic wand. Um, and to me, it's not, the goal is not to build AGI, not to build a magic wand, but actually give it to the world. And so the give is very important. That aspect means that we have to serve it, means we have to integrate it well with civilization,
Wow, wow.
right? So it's the human centered is very important. And to do that, we have to approach it from two perspectives, I would say. One is a front end. And so, what is the interface that we're going to have with AGI? And then the other is a back end. How is AGI going to go around, operate the world for us? And when you combine the two, you do have a magic wand or the closest thing to it. Um, the interface just made an announcement last week on, we call it Stream. And we call it the universal interface. We think it's really the future of how we're going to interact with technology. Um, the idea of Stream is that the interface is generating the entire experience on the fly, especially for you, customized for you. So the way you experience the world might be different. If you go back to the metaphor of the goggles you talked about earlier, right? We all have goggles and we can't take them off. One of the fascinating things you realize in philosophy is the you know when you begin in philosophy, you think, oh, I have goggles, but maybe I can take them off, and that's how I become wise. And actually, being wise is to realize you can't take them off, and then kind of live with that and be more free as a result.
Yeah.
So Stream augments your goggles. It's there for you, and we think this is a way to connect humans to AGI without actually putting implants in our brain, but through empathy, AGI understanding you and presenting the information and the options for you in a way that amplifies your agency, right? So that is Stream.
And by the way, I will link to Stream. I have looked at the page that you have launched just a few days ago, maybe last week. I have read through it. It's very interesting. It's like, as you said, kind of like the goggles or the universal interface between us and the world, the front end for the Internet of Agents, the the general interface between our cognition and the world out there that will uh, implement our intention into action or facilitate our intention and turn it into action. Those are kind of like the ways I understand it. So I'll link to it so people can check it out. Uh, So tell me a little more about your company before we go into the magic wand idea, though. So your company is in Japan. It's been operating there for how long? And I know for a while it's been in stealth mode. Then you kind of left in stealth mode and you were kind of in incognito mode or kind of low key mode, if you will. And now you're kind of stepping out of that, which is the reason why you're talking to me today, of course. So tell me a little more about your company. How many people? How long you've been together? Do you have any paying clients? Do you have investors? Give me as much as you can.
Cool. So we've been around for almost 4 years now. So I left Google um, yeah, 3 years and a half, and to focus on this company. It was co-founded by myself and Nima. He's one of my best friends. We've been best friends for a long time. He was at Google for 10 years, and we met together at Google. His first company was called CleverSense. He started out of Stanford, and then Google acquired it. And he was an area tech leader. So he runs basically all on-device AI at Google for a long time. So together we embarked on this journey, and we realized very early on that to actually have meaningful impact with AI, you need to affect the physical world, not just the digital world. Maybe this is connected back to my childhood in Lebanon, right? We actually need to affect physical change. And so the way to do that is through robotics. And looking around the Bay Area, there wasn't any strong robotics companies. Whereas Japan was the leader in robotics. About 50% at some point of the world's industrial robots were built in Japan. So to me, it seemed clear that the thing to do is to have a company co-located between the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and Tokyo. So I moved here, started the company. We were fortunate to hire some really amazing, brilliant people. We have 3 generations of Japan robotic champions in our team.
Wow.
We have a world champion in robotics. Um, Very talented team. We're about 20 people now, and very mission focused. Extremely positive energy environment. We have, I'm very proud of the culture we have. It does feel like a family. I'm, you know, I'm hoping this doesn't stop me from scaling the company because I'm having so much fun right now. Uh, and maybe the next step is we're gonna get larger, and that is, are we gonna maintain the same quality of culture? Is an open challenge for me.
So you had angel investors, I take it, or
Yeah, we've raised $4.7 million so far, from angels, VCs as well, several VCs,
that's like
include.
pocket change. If what you're telling me is true,
Mhm.
like the scale of that investment compared to the task you have set for yourself and the kind of impact that a successful test or experiment can have on the world, $4.7 million is not even a joke of a joke about a joke
I
compared
agree.
to what the big companies are like. They're doing 30, 40, 50. Microsoft is doing $80 billion for next year, my understanding is. in terms of investment to scale, right? 4.7 million. My goodness. I'm sorry. I'm just like going off here, but this is blowing my mind. People buy cars for more than that.
I totally agree. We are gonna do a large round
I
in
bet
Q1.
you.
Yes. The reason, though, is that we didn't need that much resources is because I would say probably two reasons. One is we didn't want to play the game of scale up existing models. We really wanted to focus on pushing the algorithmic forefront because of what we discussed. We want to figure out how the neocortex, that's the thing that's going to scale.
Moonshots. You are going for the moonshots.
Exactly. And for that, it's better to just move fast and have minimal kind of investors or other stakeholders breathing behind your back, get me revenue now. So just move as fast as possible. That's one aspect of it. The second is that we're not a research lab. So research labs, they don't know what they want to build. So they hire a whole bunch of smart people and give them a lot of resources to try different ideas and see where it go. But we had a very clear roadmap of what we wanted to do. We had, I mean, a lot of this was actually in my PhD thesis, right? So I mean, we knew what we wanted to build. So it was just about executing and also building kind of a small but tight uh, ecosystem around it.
Wow.
So, and yeah, and one of the things that we've done well is be able to work with robotics companies. So even a lot of the, I would say, labs, they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, but they haven't generated any revenue. We've already generated $1.3 million, dollars, mostly through collaborating with companies like Honda, Denso, Hitachi. So a lot of the brand name companies in Japan, we've been able to build these relationships with the goal of thinking about the ecosystem. Because in the end, I don't think one company should dominate AI, obviously. I think what we should do is build the tool and then let the world use it to shape the future however they like, right? So we want to give our technology for developers. So I mentioned Stream, the other product that's going to come out in a week from now, hopefully. So there's I can announce it now or pre-announce it. It's called Genesis, which is then a tool for developers to let them build these agentic operators. So these operators basically can run robots, autonomous vehicles, pretty much anything that you want um, through these models, right? So it goes back to the whole planning, being able to use tools, and whether we achieve AGI or not is still to be determined. If we did, it will be powered by AGI.
My goodness. Even if you don't achieve AGI and if you do the other things, that will be pretty valuable and substantial. But if you back it up with AGI, I mean, holy Christ, like you're blowing my mind here a little bit. Well, I'll be watching your kind of web page and the space to see for for whenever any announcement comes out. Let's talk a little bit about the magic wand here because that's kind of like a Harry Potter esque metaphor,
Mhm.
and you know you can have a magic wand and you can give it to Harry Potter and he can protect us, or you can give it to you know who. Uh, we cannot mention his name, and he would enslave us or destroy the world. And that kind of goes back to the original initial point that I came up with in our conversation about the fact that, and I actually wrote the piece many years ago, maybe a decade ago, that technology is a magnifying mirror because it reflects our dreams and fears, the best and the worst in us, our good and our evil. And so the claim that I made with that metaphor was that yes, technology is super important. Yes, it amplifies, but ultimately it amplifies us. And so it's good to work on the technology, but we also have to work on our own selves, because if we just complain about the image in the mirror and our solution is polishing the mirror without actually working on fixing our own selves, therefore the image that we project in the mirror, we're not going to make any worthwhile progress whatsoever, because the problem originates in us. And so today, for example, going away from the Potter universe and going into the real world, if you give that magic wand to, you know, Putin or Assad or the Chinese government or Bolsonaro in Brazil, who is currently being investigating for trying to stage a coup d'etat, maybe even President Trump, I don't know. There's so many people in the world that scare me having that kind of a wand in their hands. So how do you feel about that? I mean, that's like, and do you feel responsible then? Therefore, if you are the wand creator and then you hand it into the hands of other people, and then where does your responsibility go with respect of how they use it and what kind of potentially distraction they wreak upon?
Yeah, that is a very powerful uh, question and statement, and I totally believe it's my responsibility to do my best within within the tools that I'm building, right? So I can't control everything, but the tools I'm building, if they're used for harm, I'm going to blame myself, right? And so I have to take these moral questions extremely seriously. So I've struggled with these questions since I started working in AGI 20 years ago. And the result of all of that is the book, The Rise of Superintelligence. And in the book, I define a framework for aligning superintelligence. And actually, it's a little bit more ambitious than that. It's not only aligning superintelligence, but also trying to align different stakeholders. So humans with other humans and humans with AI all together, right? So that is the bold claim of the book, that there's a framework by which we can do this well. However, there's no guarantees because again, the universe is open-ended, and you know, there's a paradox with freedom. Is like if I force freedom upon you, then it's not really freedom. The
Yeah.
only thing I can do is, hey, this is door to freedom, but you have to choose to go through it. So that's what I'm attempting to do in the book series. Actually, is give a potential framework for look how to understand alignment and how to use AI to amplify human agency and also the best of what is human.
Yeah, the problem with agency and freedom is that they come with the ability to do good and the ability to do evil, because there is no freedom and agency if you cannot do both. And so that kind of scares me, because there's several version on the Greek myth about Prometheus, but the
Mhm.
Platonic version was that the reason why Zeus got pissed off with Prometheus was not the popular reason that people think is because he gave fire to humans. Now, the reason why, because Zeus didn't think that humans had the wisdom to control fire. And when Prometheus gave fire to humanity, actually, all kind of calamities started to happen according to the Plato version of the story. And you can even make an argument that the damage was greater than the benefit. And the whole moral of the story, and that's what pissed off Zeus, and that's the reason why he punished Prometheus so severely and kind of chained him to this uh, big mountainside as an example of someone who gives power where without wisdom. And for Zeus, power had to go with wisdom. Now that's very wise of Zeus, but as we know later on, the gods, all this, the Greek gods, just like by the way the Norse gods all destroy themselves in this gargantuan god warfare war that erupts among the gods, whether the Greeks or the Norse, the Nordic ones, and they all end up the same way, dead. Which reminds me of Stuart Brand saying once that we're all as powerful as gods, so we might as well start behaving as such. And now you're talking about magic wand, and my concern from an ethical philosophical point of view, and Yuval Harari says that humanity is a mass murdering species because once we show up somewhere, we know from the archaeological and historical records other species start going extinct. And we are just, I don't know, as we said, 20 or 30 seconds before the doom's clock hits midnight. So I am, it's an open question. It's not a statement, but are we ready even for having such power in our hands? Are we ready to use a magic wand in a non destructive, wise, kind of compassionate, magnanimous, positive, progressive manner?
I think we need to have a lot of conversations and put a lot of effort to get ready. And I think the time to start is now.
Definitely, my whole purpose of starting this blog 15 years ago and this podcast 15 years ago was precisely this conversation. I have had an infinitesimally minuscule impact, I might say. Uh, but that's been my kind of my impetus, my purpose for being, if you will, is to bring ethics into the technology conversation. So for the first 10 years, people were often confused that my topic was AI and technology, and that was the content. But the context was always AI, because my claim was always that technology and science are the how we do things, but ethics is the why, or it should be the why anyway, because if you screw up your why, even if you get the best how, you can end up doing more damage than good. And based on what you're telling me now, it seems like we're getting there. We're getting very close to that moment with that kind of power and these kinds of civilization impacting decisions. And I'm scared.
Yes. So, do you want to know how I view it? How I view
Please,
alignment? Yes.
please,
So, but there's so much I can talk about that's
please.
sidestep. So, should I attack the alignment directly, or do
Take
you want me
as
to?
much as you want and you need. I will shut up now. This is your stage.
Okay. Um, One comment I want to make about the death of gods in mythology, which I agree with you is a recurring theme, is that it might be actually a very positive thing, because that maybe that is the definition of true enlightenment. So it's not, when you're walking on the path to enlightenment, you have all these gods and notions. And then, as you discussed with Alan Watts, when you arrive, maybe you just you're seeing the world again as it is, but in a new context. So maybe there's something about the death of gods that is hinting towards that. So that's one point I wanted to make that I thought you might find interesting. The second, um, is about magic wands. I want to tell you a story that's very endearing for me to why our mission is to give humankind a magic wand.
Please, I love stories.
So this goes back to my childhood again. So I have a sister, and I challenged her uh, to to challenge me. Uh, Basically, I said, Uh, Name anything that you want, and I can invent it for you. Right? Whatever you want, any type of machine, any type of invention, I'll invent whatever you want. And she thought about it more deeply than I expected. And she said, build me a magic wand.
Wow.
And she gave me the reasons. And I love the reasons actually more than the request. She said, if you invent a magic wand, I don't need to bother you again. Because then whatever I want, I can just do for myself. So that story stuck with me. And it's been an inspiration. Now, let's talk about alignment. And I think the word freedom is scary. And the word freedom is not to be taken lightly. There's as you've studied philosophy, so you know that there's a huge history of debating what freedom means. And if you look at it on a surface value, freedom is just I do what I want or no constraints. I think that is that type of freedom doesn't work. It has a lot of logical inconsistencies. Um, for example, are you free if you're not free to bind yourself? Right? So there's a lot of contradictions within freedom, right? So are you free not to be free to fall in love, which is another form of binding yourself in a sense, right? So, and does freedom even have a meaning if you can't even fall in love? So there's a lot of deep logical contradictions within freedom, and there's a rich history of philosophers that have been talking about freedom from Kant to Hegel. Um, right now, Zizek has a recent book on freedom, which I like. Freedom is disease without a cure.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I try to look at it from first principles, right? How would I define freedom in a way that avoids contradictions like that? And the way to think about it is by looking at the concept of intelligence or agency. What is the concept of agency? So to have agency is to be able to perceive the world, to make plans and make decisions, have preferences, and take action on the world. And you also need to maintain yourself. If you're dead, there's no point having agency. So let's take all of these to infinity. So infinite perception, infinite capacity to make the right decisions and plan, and infinite capacity to manifest or realize what you want, your intention in the world. So that's infinite knowledge, infinite goodness, infinite power.
Sounds very godly.
It's infinite vitality. Exactly. That happens to be exactly the Abrahamic definition of God, which basically is the highest notion of freedom or the highest being we can possibly contemplate. So, infinite, in the traditional definition, there's infinite knowledge, infinite uh, goodness, and infinite power, but there's no vitality because God is everywhere. So there's no need for the vitality aspect. But when you want to restrict it to in a specific agent, you have to include the vitality component. So it's kind of a cycle. And it's a point at infinity. Again, it's an asymptotic definition. And what's the point of defining a point at infinity? Well, it gives you directionality, right? So you can. It's a tool. It's an abstract tool that helps you define a goal. So what I'm defining, this new definition of freedom, can be used as a shared goal for both AGI and humanity. And there's so many reasons why it's a goal that we can kind of all align on, right? Um, and in the book, I go through a lot of these points, right? Like if you look at uh, the political discussion between realists and the liberal people, it seems like they're fighting each other, but when you look at it from the lens of freedom, they're actually completely aligned. So um, this as a shared goal seems to be something that we can all root for. And in fact, maybe it's not even humans that can agree on this. maybe the definition of life itself is about having greater and greater or aiming towards freedom, because if you don't, you basically die. So you have a choice: it's entropy, death, or freedom. And I can even say that any being, and you can define a new way of thinking of natural selection as a process of moving towards freedom. You either have death or freedom. But that definition doesn't give you the whole story, right? It's an abstract point. It's give us directionality, but then there's a lot of detail, right? Because it's in mathematics there's the concept of being under constraint. So it's an under constraint goal, right? It gives you some constraint, but it doesn't give you all the necessary ingredients to define your direction. And that is a feature, not a bug, because that means your goal can be different than my goal, yet they're aligning at a higher level, right? So even though you can have many different agents with different opinions, preferences, beliefs, dreams, different goals, they could align under one umbrella of this uh, freedom. So it's the minimally constraining thing that we can all agree on to provide alignment and yet maintain our diversity,
So
right?
I like that. I like that, but I'm struggling. Please excuse my ignorance. I'm struggling to understand how it would work, like in the context of Putin and Zelensky, Trump and the Democrats, or even us here in Canada, who are very kind of moderate compared to most other places, or even with respect between humanity and AI.
Mm.
Tell me more about that alignment. How do you solve it with freedom? I understand you're solving it with freedom. And by the way, there's so much. There's like so many things. My mind is going into so many direction. Like the fact that freedom, for example, always comes with responsibility. Whether in Spider-Man, whether in Sigmund Freud, and I think was it Freud or which ones was it Jung who said that we don't just need a statue of liberty, we also need a statue of responsibility on the other end of on the Pacific end of the United States, because freedom the freedom for you to swing your fist goes only as far as my nose, and there comes a point where if you're free to swing your fists towards my nose, uh, there has to be a stop point because that's where my nose begins. And so there are inevitably limitations to freedom, it seems to me. There are inevitably, that's what a Buddhist would say, I guess, a Buddhist philosopher. There's nothing infinite in our universe. Everything that's born dies sooner or later. There is nothing when it comes to freedom, it has to be limited by responsibility or bounded by responsibility, and my freedom would has to be restrained, but by the realm of my freedom would has to be restrained by the realm of yours. And when you put that into the context of 7 billion people, warring nations, Israel and Gaza, Russia and Ukraine, so many places, how do we how do we solve it with freedom? Please tell me. I'm just trying to understand.
Great question. I think we need to step a little bit back, and the reason I used the word freedom, I knew it was going to evoke misunderstanding from people, because the current colloquial definition of freedom is that your freedom is just your capacity to do whatever you want. But the philosophical definition, going back to Hegel, freedom and responsibility are one and the same. You can never have a free life without being responsible. In fact, in the definition that I mentioned, there's not only knowledge and power, but there's also goodness in there, because because in the end of the day, you have a choice on what you choose to value, right? So that is itself a freedom. And so the higher your freedom is, the more your values are in alignment with the unfolding of reality. If you have, if you have bad values, that's fine. but you're basically going to die very soon, right? So if you can choose your values, you would choose values that makes you, you know, thrive the most, right? Because there's a freedom at that level of value. And so by increasing your freedom, you're not only increasing your knowledge and your power and vitality, but you're also increasing your goodness. That is an important variable. And without it, freedom runs into a lot of contradictions, right? Now, let me operationalize this a little bit for you because it's so abstract, right? So let's actually bring it down to earth, make it a little more concrete. Um, this is the observation that will make things work well. Okay. We can redefine the price of actions in the world as minus freedom. Price equal minus freedom. So, what does that mean? Now, if you want to buy a pen, right, you pay a certain cost for it, right? What I'm proposing is that cost should be how much that pen is taking us away from freedom. And by doing so, you have a way of distributing decision making across society. So you have a market mechanism, completely free market, but the prices are not determined through supply and demand. They're actually determined through um, a value function on freedom, which, by the way, includes supply and demand as a subsidiary, right?
Wow.
And we can use superintelligence to actually calculate those prices. What
Holy cow.
what this
You're
small
proposing not AGI, you're proposing us to reimagine our moral, economic, social, cultural, political, organizational, freaking religious systems, not just AGI. AGI is really, as big as it may be, a subset, a smaller part, minor part, even if I may say so, without any intention to diminish it as gargantuan as it is. But compared to those things you're now talking, it's like blowing my mind even more.
it has to come together in order to it has to come together. They're all one package in my mind. It's a new era of freedom. So these prices, what you can do with that, one of the things that happen as we get more powerful, the economic externalities will start mattering more, right? Like the our decisions might affect the environment a lot more. You know, if I give you a magic wand and you choose to build a ladder to the moon, which you might be able to do, well, you're going to destroy the whole earth in the process, but you can still do it. So, how are we going to price economic externalities? The traditional economic models operated in a realm where humans were not as powerful as we will be very soon. And so, we need to have a new way of defining prices. And that price equal minus freedom works as a guiding principle. You can flip it the other way around. So a lot of people talk about basic income, but who said prices have to be always positive? Prices can be negative. So how about you get paid for decisions that increase freedom? For example, sleeping well. So if you sleep well 8 hours, you're improving your health, right? And it's adding to the freedom capacity of the ecosystem, which means the price has to be negative, which means you should get paid for it. So it gives you a way of deriving basic income from first principle. Rather than thinking of basic income as a handout, which is completely the wrong way to think about it, basic income is you being rewarded for maintaining your life, which, you know, by you maintaining your life, you're increasing the freedom for everyone. So this gives you a way to get basic income. This gives you a way to account for economic externalities like the environment and so on. And it basically ethically aligns the entire economy. And by doing so, it also ethically aligns agents within the economy that are not just human, But increasingly, they will become more AGI agents, and eventually, the entire economy will be run by superintelligence. And so, by aligning the economy, we also align AI.
So you touched on basic income, and where does technological unemployment fit within this whole conversation?
Um, I think if I was to say it in a controversial way, I would say we should have technological employment. It would be progress from what we have now. What I would want is a world where basically everyone can live the artistic life, can be creative, can define their own purpose and destiny, and not have to work in order to maintain basic subsistence. We're too rich for that. We're going to be even more rich. And so, through having an economic system where you get paid basically to sleep well, you get paid to drink water, to do all the basic things to maintain yourself, you're going to have resources in order to define, to shape your life in whatever way you want. So you can define your own destiny. And this brings us also to a deeper question. It's like, what's the purpose of humankind when we have super intelligence?
What's the meaning of life post scarcity?
Yes. And the way I'm thinking is that we are eventually basically the moral compass for super intelligence, because freedom alone is not sufficient, is underdetermined.
Wow.
The details is what matters, and we fill in the details, and we have the right to do so because our history traces back to the beginning of reality, the birthplace of the universe. So in order to define you properly, I have to take into not only the content but the context. The context of you is the entire universe.
Actually, I say in my keynote that one of the differences between humans and AI is that AI lacks context. And that's why uh, humans create context. The reason and AIs can't do that. That's why they need infinite amounts of data and reinforced learning. And we are the ones who provide the context because we are beings in search of meaning, not, which is to say, context, not content. AIs are very good in content. They will be creating more and more of it as the future unfolds. The content will be the easy part, but the important part is the context. And at least yet so far, and that may change, humans are the ones who provide context, whether with our own data, whether with our own reinforced learning, whether with our own design, or whether even with our own kind of role models, if you will, or living examples, or wisdom, if we have any. But Jad, I am afraid that I have had you here now for over 2 hours, and I know you have another virtual meeting very important to you, which would start in only 20 minutes. So I will have to bring this conversation to an end in the next couple of minutes. Let's have a couple of agreements and or maybe arrangements. Number one, I really enjoy this conversation. I feel like I have barely touched the surface with you, honestly. How about we meet again for a follow up interview in the new year? You tell me when, and then we can talk with you about whether you're ready for your new announcement and how much we can go discussing that stage. Because I think the first 2 hours we laid down so much foundational groundwork, which would create even more context for the second interview conversation, by the way. And both of those would be, I think, equally important in some ways, at least. So, how about we have a later conversation for arranging that kind of a follow up interview? Are you okay with that idea? Because I didn't even scratch the surface with you today.
Sounds great. Yes, I feel like we just got started. There's a lot to talk about in the alignment economy and all that stuff and meaning making. So, yeah, we'll coordinate.
Fantastic. Okay. So, for the time being, let me just ask you this. Three questions. Number one is, when is your book available? Is it available now?
Yes, it's available now internationally.
So, the first book, which you have shared with me already, is one out of four. It is
Mhm.
available internationally, and it's called The Rise of Super Intelligence, a guidebook for human emancipation in the age of AGI. Three more books are forthcoming in that series. So next time we will go a lot deeper into the alignment problem and into the books, which the first book talks a lot about the alignment problem. Second question is, where can people find more about you and your work, whether you as an individual or you as a company and your products, obviously?
Yeah, please visit integral.ai. This is the website,
Mhm.
and my email is there. Happy to receive email
And the
from my.
stream website was what? Remind me, please. It was integral.ai / stream.
Yes.
Perfect. And that's what we talked about as the universal interface, the kind of, yeah, goggles or glasses that we discuss, which will be coloring our world, and we would have the power to choose and to shorten the distance between the intention and the action that we can take in the world. Okay. And then, final question then would be, what's the message you want to send us away with today that would carry us through the holiday season and impatiently await our next conversation in the new year with trepidation about the results from your experiment that's ongoing in the meantime? What's the message you want to send us with? Perhaps the one most important thing that you want to send us with today after a 2 hour conversation with you?
It's a wonderful time to be alive, but the universe is open ended. Don't take anything for granted and start engaging in conversations. The matter is in your hands, right? Reality is up for you. You're going to shape it. So take that responsibility seriously. It's a very exciting time to be alive, and you have power. So please exercise it.
Thank you. And my minuscule power contains to creating these conversations with the future, which I've been working on for the past 15 years. And I feel like today we did have one of those. That was very fascinating, exciting, and enjoyable, like really pleasant for me. And I learned so much, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation. So, Dr. Jad Tarifi, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.